In the last episode, we watched Ambiorix deliver one of Rome's worst defeats in Gaul. A legion wiped out, its commanders dead, and Caesar's authority shaken across the north. But that victory came with a price. Ambiorix had provoked the one Roman commander who never ignored a challenge. This episode shows what followed: the Roman retaliation. You'll see how Caesar responded the moment the news reached him, how he drove through winter storms and hostile territory to pull his scattered legions together, how he launched rapid counterstrikes, how he raced to save Cicero's besieged camp, and how he turned the rest of the winter into a grinding campaign of retribution. Ambiorix believed he could finish what he had begun, and Caesar intended to make an example of every tribe that rose against him. Only one of them would be right. After the destruction of the Roman legion, Ambiorix and his retainers rode first into the territory of the Attuatusi and then onward to the lands of the Nervii. Meanwhile, most of the Eburones had already dispersed, taking their share of the plunder back to their homesteads, a pattern typical of many tribal or irregular forces throughout history. Yet the news of the victory spread rapidly. The account of a Roman legion wiped out in open country proved far more influential than the scattered warriors themselves. The story alone was enough to stir neighboring tribes and convince the Nervii to take action. Encouraged by the scale of Ambiorix's success, they resolved to attack the Roman legion wintering within their territory, commanded by Quintus Cicero, the brother of the famous orator. Quintus Cicero was not known as the most eager of military commanders, yet when the Nervii launched their sudden assault on his camp, he reacted with notable effectiveness. The Romans outside the ramparts were cut down at once, but the gates were quickly closed and secured, allowing the garrison to organize a defense. They had received no warning of the earlier disaster and were therefore caught completely off guard. But despite the surprise, they managed to repel the initial attack. The Nervii, supported by allied clans as well as contingents of Attuatusi and some Eburones, then shifted to a formal siege. During the night, Cicero's troops constructed 120 small towers to reinforce the camp's ramparts. The materials for these defenses had already been stockpiled within the camp, which suggests that their fortifications were still incomplete at the time of the attack. Now, with the enemy encircling them, the Romans worked with intense urgency to finish and strengthen their walls. A second major assault was launched the next day, but this too was driven back. Whatever his natural temperament or military skill, Quintus Cicero conducted himself in a manner expected of a Roman senator. During the fighting, he moved among the soldiers, urging them to stand firm, and at night, he oversaw the continued reinforcement of the defenses and the production of fresh missiles. His health, however, deteriorated under the strain, and the troops eventually persuaded him to withdraw to his tent. It is likely that much of the practical leadership fell to his officers, and it is possible that Cicero, with limited military experience, may at times have been more symbolic than operationally decisive. Caesar had strong political reasons to maintain good relations with Quintus, and above all with his famous brother, and this almost certainly influenced the favorable portrayal in the commentaries. Even so, despite his shortcomings, Quintus Cicero displayed genuine courage in the face of a determined and sustained assault. Recognizing that direct assault was failing to break the Roman camp, Ambiorix again turned to deception. Having succeeded once through treachery, he attempted to repeat the tactic and requested a parley with Quintus Cicero. During the meeting, he repeated the same narrative he had used at the other Roman cantonment, claiming he had been unwillingly drawn into the conflict and insisting that the real threat, the Germans, was on its way. He urged the Romans to withdraw while there was still time, promising them safe passage in whatever direction they wished to march. Cicero refused. He replied that it was not Roman practice to negotiate terms with an armed enemy. If Ambiorix ended the attack and dismissed his forces, Cicero would report the matter to Caesar and abide by Caesar's judgment. With this answer, the talks ended. Ambiorix returned to his warriors and resumed the assault on the Roman position. The siege dragged on. The Belgic forces encircled the Roman camp with their own ditch and rampart, and began constructing mantlets and other siege equipment. Only a few years earlier, such techniques had been unknown in Gaul, but the tribes had observed Roman methods and adapted them with surprising speed. Inside the camp, the garrison grew steadily weaker. A large number of soldiers were wounded, forcing the remaining fit men to take on an ever-increasing share of the work and the fighting. The Romans were badly outnumbered. Caesar claims that the Nervii fielded 60,000 warriors, an assertion that conveniently ignores his earlier report of the enormous losses they had suffered in 57 BC. In any case, the imbalance was severe, and without outside help, the garrison would almost certainly have been overwhelmed. Quintus Cicero had attempted to send word to Caesar from the moment the attack began, but every messenger failed to break through the Belgic blockade. Several were even captured, dragged back to the walls, and executed in front of the defenders as a deliberate act of intimidation. More than a week passed before anyone managed to reach Caesar. The breakthrough came through the initiative of a Nervian named Vertico, who had remained loyal to the Romans and was staying inside the camp. He advised Cicero to use one of his own slaves, a Gaul who could move more easily among the Belgic forces without drawing suspicion. The man was promised his freedom if he succeeded. The message was concealed inside the shaft of a javelin, and under cover of darkness he slipped through the siege lines. Against the odds, he reached Caesar and delivered the warning that Cicero's garrison was on the brink of collapse. News of the crisis reached Caesar late at night in his winter headquarters at Samarobriva. Cicero's message not only warned that his own camp was close to collapse, but also gave Caesar the first indication that Sabinus and Cotta had been destroyed. Until this point, he had known nothing of the wider uprising, a reminder of how dependent he was on friendly Gallic nobles for intelligence. The shock was severe, but Caesar understood that immediate action was essential. If Cicero's legion fell, the rebellion would only grow. Caesar had only one legion with him at Samarobriva, along with the army's baggage, records, pay chest, grain supplies, and numerous hostages. He could not move fast with all of this, but he could not abandon it either. His first order went to his quaestor, Marcus Crassus, whose legion was camped 25 miles away. Crassus was told to march at once, leaving at midnight. By the next morning, Caesar's scouts met Crassus's advanced units on the road and learned the legion was close behind. Crassus then took over the defense of Samarobriva, while Caesar marched out with a single understrength legion and about 400 cavalry. Caesar hoped to link up with 2 more legions on the way. Caius Fabius managed to reach him, but Labienus sent word that he was pinned down by a Treveran army only a few miles from his camp and could not move. Labienus also confirmed the fate of Sabinus and Cotta through survivors who had reached him. With this, Caesar realized he would have only 2 depleted legions, barely 7,000 men, and no chance of further reinforcements for weeks. It was a dangerous situation, yet waiting would almost certainly doom Cicero and spark an even larger revolt. The army marched with minimal baggage and little food, moving quickly through a countryside already stripped of supplies. Speed was the only option. Caesar himself was driven not only by strategy but by loyalty to his men. He had taken an oath not to cut his hair or beard until he avenged the fallen cohorts. Now unshaven, he led the march at forced pace. Scouts captured prisoners who confirmed that Cicero was still holding out. Caesar managed to send a message into the camp by writing it in Greek characters, tying it to a spear, and having a Gallic horseman throw it over the walls. It went unnoticed for 2 days before being found and read to the garrison. Soon after, they saw smoke rising in the distance, evidence of Caesar's advance as Roman troops burned farms along their route. The besieging Belgians received the same reports. Abandoning the siege, they moved to intercept Caesar, confident in their superior numbers. Cicero then sent another messenger through the lines, informing Caesar that a Belgic army was marching to confront him. The messenger reached Caesar around midnight. Caesar addressed his soldiers directly, as was his habit, calmly explaining the danger. Despite the urgency, he marched only at dawn the next morning, covering 4 miles before making contact. The Belgic force waited on a ridge behind a stream. a familiar defensive position, similar to those they had used during the fighting in 57 BC. Caesar had arrived, but a major battle now lay ahead. Caesar faced a difficult situation. His army was heavily outnumbered, and he lacked the supplies needed for a long campaign of maneuver. A direct attack was out of the question. Crossing a stream and then advancing uphill against an enemy already in position would have placed his men at a major tactical disadvantage and almost certainly ended in defeat. To avoid this, Caesar needed the Belgians to abandon their strong defensive ground. His only realistic option was to provoke them, forcing them to leave the ridge and attack him on terrain more favorable to the Romans. To encourage the Nervii to underestimate him, Caesar ordered his men to build a camp even smaller than normal for a force without baggage. The internal streets were laid out unusually narrow, creating the impression of a weak and cramped army. The intention was simple: make the enemy despise his forces and tempt them into attacking. At the same time, Caesar did not rely solely on this gamble. He sent out patrols to search for alternative crossing points along the stream, hoping to find a way to outflank the Belgic position if needed. For the rest of the day, the two armies watched each other across the valley. Only the cavalry moved forward, engaging in scattered skirmishes, while both sides waited to see who would make the first decisive move. At dawn the next day, the situation repeated itself, but this time, Caesar instructed his auxiliary cavalry to fall back deliberately. The Nervii were not known for strong cavalry, so seeing their horsemen drive Roman riders all the way back to the camp would have been especially encouraging for them. To reinforce the impression that his army was frightened and on the defensive, Caesar ordered the ramparts to be built higher than normal. He also had the 4 camp gates blocked with a single row of cut turf, making it look as though the Romans expected a direct assault and were desperate to seal themselves in. The Nervii finally took the bait. They crossed the stream and advanced onto the Roman side of the valley, moving cautiously at first, but gaining confidence as Caesar's men continued their staged displays of fear. Roman soldiers even pulled back from the ramparts, pretending to be intimidated by the approaching mass of warriors. Emboldened, the Belgians sent heralds forward, announcing that any Roman who wished to desert would be welcomed without punishment. Those who failed to come over by a fixed hour, they warned, would receive no mercy once the attack began. Eventually, the Nervii reached the Roman rampart, and some began pulling apart the turf walls that blocked the gates. That was the moment Caesar had been waiting for. He ordered the attack, and the cohorts positioned behind each gateway surged forward, knocking down the light barriers with ease. The sudden Roman charge sent the Nervii into panic. Many broke and ran, pursued by the legionaries and by the cavalry Caesar released in support. Some were cut down, others threw away their weapons and shields in their haste to escape. Caesar soon called off the pursuit, however. He did not want his men drawn too far into the surrounding forests and marshes, where an ambush could quickly turn victory into disaster. With the enemy scattered, Caesar pushed on and finally reached Cicero's camp. He made a point of praising his legate and personally inspecting the officers and soldiers who had held out under siege. Only a small fraction of the garrison had escaped injury, though many of the wounded were still able to serve. The next day, Caesar held another assembly. He informed the men of the disaster suffered by Sabinus and Cotta, placing the blame on Sabinus, and reassured the army about the campaign ahead. Afterwards, he sent Fabius and his legion back to their winter quarters among the Morini, while he escorted Cicero's survivors and his own legion to Samarobriva. There, he kept these units, along with Crassus's legion, concentrated through the winter to provide a strong reserve in case the rebellion spread. Caesar remained with the army instead of returning to Italy for the winter. The situation in Gaul was too unstable for him to leave. In Armorica, roughly the area of modern Brittany, a large group of tribesmen assembled near the winter camp of Lucius Roscius and the 13th Legion. However, the force soon broke up and dispersed without attempting an attack. Around the same time, Cavarinus, whom Caesar had installed as king of the Senones, was targeted by hostile chieftains within his own tribe. He narrowly escaped assassination and fled to Caesar at Samarobriva to report the revolt. At the heart of that winter's unrest, only one clash truly mattered, and it fell to Labienus to resolve it. Indutiomarus, unable to win over the Germans, again marched a Treveran force toward the Roman camp. Day after day, the Treveri formed up on the plain, trying to bait Labienus into a pitched battle. He denied them every time. Then came the moment he had been waiting for. When the Treveri finally broke formation and began drifting back toward their camp, Labienus acted. He unleashed his allied cavalry with a single, blunt command: kill Indutiomarus and leave the others. They struck during the withdrawal. Indutiomarus fell, and his head was carried back to Labienus as proof. Deprived of their leader, the Treveran host disintegrated and scattered into the countryside. During the winter, Caesar focused not only on replacing his losses, but on expanding his army well beyond its previous strength. He wanted the Gauls to believe that Rome's supply of manpower could not be exhausted. 3 new legions were raised in Cisalpine Gaul, the newly formed 14th to replace the unit that had been destroyed, as well as the 15th and the 1st. The 1st Legion had originally been intended for Pompey's army in Spain and had already sworn its oath to him, which is why its number followed a different sequence. Pompey, who was not planning major campaigns of his own, agreed to lend the legion to Caesar for the good of the Republic and out of personal friendship. With these additions, Caesar now commanded 10 legions. But while he rebuilt his forces, the tribes in revolt were also gathering their strength for the next phase of the conflict. Ambiorix drove the rebellion forward, securing a formal alliance with the Treveri. The Nervii, the Attuatusi, and the Menapii were already openly at war with Rome, while other peoples, like the Senones and the Carnutes, had expelled pro-Roman leaders and refused Caesar's summons to council. Seeing the coalition growing, Caesar understood that waiting for the normal spring campaign would be a mistake. In every revolt, the rebels hold the initiative at the start. To take it back, he chose to strike early, before the tribes could fully coordinate their plans. Caesar planned to strike hard and show that Rome remained powerful despite its recent setback. The rebellion had no single leader, no capital, and no unified army, so defeating one tribe would not automatically force the others to submit. Each would have to be subdued separately. Since there were no clear strategic targets, Caesar aimed directly at the tribe's livelihoods. Roman forces would burn houses, destroy crops, seize or kill livestock, and take prisoners. The Romans called this vastatio, a practice comparable to what we would now describe as genocide. It was brutally effective. By destroying the resources that sustained resistance, the Romans aimed to break the will of the enemy and force them to surrender. Few armies in history carried out such methods with the systematic efficiency shown by Caesar's legions. Before winter ended, Caesar gathered 4 legions, likely near Samarobriva, and launched an attack against the Nervii. Tribal armies took time to assemble, so the Nervii had almost no opportunity to organize a defense or evacuate their people. The shock was even greater because no large Gallic force could operate effectively during this season. In fact, the great Belgic coalition of 57 BC had broken apart in midsummer simply because it ran out of food. Caesar's winter assault caught the Nervii at their most vulnerable. Caesar's success in this campaign was possible only because the Roman army operated with a highly organized supply system. His marching columns seized large numbers of civilians, gathered their livestock, and burned the surrounding settlements. Confronted with this level of destruction, the Nervii surrendered quickly and provided hostages to secure their compliance. After stabilizing the situation, Caesar pulled his forces back and sent word to the neighboring tribes, instructing them to assemble for a council at the start of spring. The Senones and Carnutes once again failed to appear at the tribal council, as did the Treveri, now led by relatives of Indutiomarus. The meeting was scheduled for the first time at Lutetia on the Seine, the chief settlement of the Parisii, the city whose name survives in modern Paris. Before the council could assemble, Caesar marched against the Senones. Caught before they could retreat behind their walls, they surrendered quickly. At the request of the Aedui, Caesar imposed only mild terms, both to honor Rome's long-standing ally and to focus on suppressing the remaining unrest. He took 100 hostages but refrained from mass enslavement. Knowing they were likely next, the Carnutes soon sent envoys backed by the Remi, and Caesar accepted their submission as well. At the council, he demanded the usual cavalry contingents from the tribes, but privately decided to keep the Senones cavalry under close watch, especially their chief, Cavarinus. Central Gaul was now effectively subdued, allowing Caesar to focus on the northeast. Ambiorix remained the most prominent enemy leader, but Caesar believed he would avoid a pitched battle. His plan, therefore, was to isolate Ambiorix by removing any tribes that might support him. He sent the baggage and supplies to Labienus with 2 legions, while he advanced with 5 legions carrying only light provisions. His first target was the Menapii. At this stage, only one of the recently raised legions had joined the main force. The Menapii followed their usual strategy of avoiding combat and relying on the dense forests and marshes of their homeland. This time, the Romans countered it effectively. Caesar split his army into 3 separate columns, each pushing into Menapian territory by clearing paths, building bridges, and laying causeways. Roman engineering made most terrain accessible when properly led. Seeing their settlements burning and realizing they could no longer hide behind the landscape, the Menapii sent envoys and surrendered. At this point, the main army pressed onward, leaving the Atrebatian chieftain, Commius, and his followers behind to ensure the Menapii did not break their submission. While Caesar advanced, the Treveri struck at Labienus. He met them with his familiar precision, drawing them onto ground that placed them at a clear disadvantage before launching his counterattack. Labienus called on his men to fight with the same resolve they had shown so often under Caesar. His 3 legions, joined by the 2 that had been guarding the baggage, smashed the Treveri in a decisive blow. Their leaders fled across the Rhine, and control of the tribe returned to Caesar's chosen candidate, Cingetorix. Ambiorix had tried to secure support from the German tribes across the Rhine, but with little success. Most Germans were still wary after the earlier defeats of Ariovistus and of the Usipetes and Tencteri, so only small groups had joined the revolt. Even so, Caesar decided to cross the Rhine again, both to discourage any further German aid to the rebels and to prevent Ambiorix from escaping east. The army marched to the Rhine and built a new bridge close to the one constructed in 55 BC. Caesar gives few details, noting only that the legions completed it quickly, since they already knew the design. The message was deliberate. The Rhine was no barrier, and Rome could enter German territory at will. As before, there was no major fighting. The Ubii immediately reaffirmed their loyalty to Rome. The Suebi withdrew deeper into their territory and, according to the Ubii, were gathering their forces. Caesar secured supplies, told the Ubii to hide their food and herds to deny them to the enemy, and advanced. The Suebi then retreated even farther, intending to fight only in the interior. Caesar halted the campaign, arguing that his army could not be supplied if he pushed too far into a land where pastoralism, not farming, dominated. After returning to the western bank of the Rhine, Caesar dismantled part of the bridge and left a garrison to guard what remained. By late summer, with crops ready for harvest, supply was easier, so he turned his attention to Ambiorix and the Eburones in the Ardennes. At night, Caesar's cavalry rode ahead under strict orders to keep the darkness unbroken. No fires, no signals, nothing to warn the enemy. Their sudden strike caught the Eburones off guard. Prisoners were taken, and under questioning they revealed where Ambiorix had gone. The horsemen closed in fast, close enough to seize his goods and his horses. but not the man himself. Ambiorix slipped away into the thick forests that had sheltered his people for generations. His co-ruler, Catuvolcus, chose a different fate. Too old to flee and unwilling to endure the ruin of his tribe, he ended his life, likely in the solemn manner of his ancestors. Caesar moved the army to Aduatuca, the site of the previous winter's disaster, where the recently raised 14th Legion guarded the baggage. He divided his remaining forces into fast-moving columns. Caesar marched toward the Scheldt, Labienus targeted the Menapii, and Trebonius advanced on the Aduatuci. These forces traveled light and were meant to return in a week. Resistance was minor, though small Roman detachments were occasionally ambushed. Judging continued devastation too costly in Roman lives, Caesar opened the Eburones to plunder by any Gaul who wished. Many responded, turning the region into a free-for-all. Before Caesar returned, Cicero's camp was attacked by Germans who had crossed the Rhine seeking loot but were driven off, though not without casualties among isolated Roman troops. Caesar spent almost the entire 53 BC campaigning without a major battle. Only Labienus achieved a significant victory. Roman operations, burning, raiding, and intimidation caused long-term economic collapse in northeastern Gaul. Archaeology shows a clear decline in wealth and material culture for at least a generation afterward. Caesar believed such severity was necessary to erase the humiliation of Sabinus' defeat. At the end of the season, he held a council at Duro Cortorum. Earlier, he had ignored unrest among the Senones and Carnutes, but now he investigated and identified the nobleman Acco as responsible. Caesar imposed an unusually harsh punishment, having him publicly scourged and executed. Ambiorix remained largely obscure for many centuries, but in 1830 CE he was elevated to the status of Belgium's national hero. After gaining independence, Belgium, like many European states, searched its ancient past for a symbolic figure who could embody national identity. Ambiorix was selected because his resistance to Rome could be presented as an early struggle for freedom, which matched the political mood of the period. In this narrative, the harsh reality of the Eburones' destruction was conveniently overlooked. In 1866 CE, a statue of Ambiorix was erected in the central square of Tongeren, portraying him as a proud Gallic warrior. The monument remains in place today.